several times throughout the trial, he would turn around and look me in the face because he'd be like, "You're Andrew," which is what she called me. And he'd be like, "She died squealing." And he would sit there and like whisper shit to me about the shit he did to her. Like, and it made me realize that she must have been calling out. He knew who I was, which didn't make sense to me. But then I'm like, she was crying out to me or something when all this was happening to her. And so he knew that was the little brother that she was talking about. And now I'm there giving him the death stare, like I'm ready to kill you, motherfucker. Oh, God, sorry, bad language. And so he keeps turning around and saying stuff to me. And I just click because I was going to fight or fight. This one was fight. So I just leap over the thing and I just start pummeling him. I'm trying to kill him. I would have, if they wouldn't have pulled me off, I would have strangled him right there in the court.
Welcome back. I'm here again with John Strader. John, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right. So where we left off, you had a number of experiences that led you to questioning what the heck's going on. And given your family connection, you knew some folks, executives at McDonnell. Was it McDonnell at the time, or was it back then
McDonnell Douglas? I didn't know them yet. I had seen them at family gatherings when we would go out there with my brothers and sisters and hang out. And like, for me, like, they were like legends. My dad was not in the picture. He was, my mom and him were not together very long. And so I was always jealous that my sisters and brothers had this great family, had a great dad, were connected, had money, and we were like the poor stepchildren, you know what I mean? Like the black sheep. Like, we were connected, but not part of the family. But, because we were family to their family, we were family, you know what I mean? In that way. So they never treated me when I was around like I was, different or weird, but they didn't like my mother. My mother embarrassed the family. So that was, it was always like, "Oh, you're her kids." "Oh, but you're siblings to my kids. So, okay, we're all in the group." But no, at this point, still, like, we're still quite a ways before I start talking to them, because we are still, in my story so far, we're late 80s, right? We're in that late period. This doesn't really start happening until around 2000. But to finish, because this is important. So for me, the next step in my research and my trying to understand this was, I was in my freshman year in college. I was already kind of doing my own background research, not talking about this to anybody. But I started dating this girl, right? And she's from Roswell. And I know about Roswell at this point. It's back in the things, people are talking about it. I'm like, "Roswell? You're from Roswell?" So I'm like, "Tell me all about it." And she's like, "Oh, and my dad and, mom still live there. My grandparents live right here in town now." And I go, "Your grandparents?" And I go, "Did they grow up there?" She goes, "Oh, yeah, they lived in Roswell through the whole thing." So I'm like, I got to meet these grandparents. You know what I mean? So I'm like schmoozing her, like, "Hey, can we go over and meet the grandparents and maybe have some like dinner and hang out?" So she was really close to them. So we would go over there and I would just start talking to the grandparents about Roswell crash. And they were like 100% like, "Oh yes, I've seen materials. I know so many people that did it." And they would just start telling me stories. And I'm like, and I'm just eating it up, right? I'm like, "Oh my God, Roswell is real. These people touched materials. They know people who had stuff." So then that summer, I'm like, "Stacy, I got to meet your parents. Like, when do we get to, let's go to Roswell, meet your parents." And the grandparents had given me a couple names of people who like physically touched debris and stuff. So I'm like down there. So I'm meeting the parents and they're being very sweet. And I'm like, "Oh, and I was talking with your mom and dad, and they said there's these really cool people I should talk to." And they go, "Oh, we can invite them over for dinner one of these nights." And I'm like, "Great." So they get over and I pepper them with Roswell questions. And at first they're like, "What do you know about Roswell?" And I'm like, "Well, let me tell you what I know." So I start telling them stuff, and I tell them that, that grandparents had told me stuff. And so then they were like, "Oh, okay." So they start telling me stuff, and they're like, "Oh yes, like people would still go out there and look for materials, and everyone knows where it is." And so I'm hearing all the like local lore, right? And I'm just like eating it up. I'm like, "Okay, Roswell is real. Wow." And I'm like, so now I'm starting to think like, okay, like, who do I know? What connections do I have that might know things, right? So I'm immediately always thinking about the McDonald's. I'm like, I I got to get in the room with these people. I have to figure out a way to like ingratiate myself somehow to the family so I can start asking questions. Like they're going to know. Like they're going to know.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
So that's in the back of my mind, right? And so I'm slowly making, a little bit more inroads with the family going when they come to visit my sister or back, things like that. So I'm working on that. But then I hear through my grapevine that Steve Schiff is, looking into Roswell. And I'm like, Roswell.
And this is the congressman from New Mexico, just to be clear.
Yes. Yeah. District 1, Albuquerque, my hometown. And so I'm like, oh my God, there's a guy. And he was not fully out yet, right? I just had family connections. I was always talking to people and they were like, oh yeah, this guy, because I was talking about Roswell. I remember I was bringing up Roswell back, and this was after Bob Lazar. So that was a big thing for me. Like it got reported even in Albuquerque, NAP's series. And so I started going to local UFO conferences, and I went to a couple in Vegas and a couple in Laughlin, over in the early 90s. And so I was already what does this Lazar guy know? Let me find out everything about him. I knew people in Los Alamos. So I did my own vetting of Lazar, because when I found out he was from Los Alamos and I heard about the jet car, I was like, okay, well, my friends who I grew up with skiing they were all kids of, lab employees. So I started asking them, I go, do you remember this jet car guy? Do you know this Lazar jet? And they didn't know his name. He was not, but they knew the jet car. They were like, oh yeah, he used to go to the airport. And because that's the only place you could literally open up any kind of vehicle like that. The only flat, expansive place in Los Alamos is the airport. So I guess he used to go test it or whatever out at the airport, and people would go out and watch. So I was like, okay, Lazar did work there, because I know he had a jet car and that friends I knew used to go watch him do his jet car thing. So I was like, holy shit, this guy's real. So I start I got a bootleg copy, VHS of NAP's series that he put on after the initial Lazar story. Then he did all his research and came out with that 8-part series. I forget what it's called. But I run those tapes to the ground. I was anything I could get. So I'm plugged in, right? And I'm listening everywhere. So I hear about Schiff. And so I go and volunteer on his campaign, because I'm I need to get close to this guy. And so I tell him about my family connections, who I am. He remembers the murder. He remembers the family. And it's not just the McDonald's, because my mom's side of the family in Albuquerque and New Mexico is also very, very politically connected and have been here since the 1800s. Very well-known family with lots of connections, right? My mom also was very close with Bill Richardson. She was very close with his wife, helped on his campaign. So I'm around all these political figures. So I start hearing about the Steve Schiff guy. And this is something that can be tracked.
For folks who don't know who Bill Richardson is, he was a former presidential candidate, Democrat, all that stuff. Yeah.
Governor of New Mexico, also head of the DOE for a little while. He was
that's interesting.
Yes, and he was an ambassador to the United Nations. So he was an ambassador. I mean, this guy was connected to everybody, right? But in those days, he was still just, a congressman from the northern New Mexico, so from Santa Fe up. So I had all those connections from Angel Fire and Santa Fe family, all that, and the Albuquerque connection. So I now know 2 politicians. But at this point, I don't know Richardson's into UFOs, right? I don't know that. I just know he's connected to the family. I've met him many times, gone to dinners. So, and he knows my mom and, all that. So I know him, but I'm not talking about UFOs yet. But Schiff, I'm like, this guy knows about Roswell. He's looking into Roswell. This is a big deal. I need to get close to this guy. So I'm just doing envelopes, licking envelopes, putting stamps, sending out mailers, moving boxes, helping when they do like, with catering, when they're doing like fundraising events. And it's the first person I ever voted for. So anyone that ever wants to check Strader, ever really know anything about Schiff, if you're able to access voting records, the very first person at least the only reason I even signed up to vote was I'm like, I'm going to support this guy because he is going up against the secret keepers, right?
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
So Schiff is like looking into this. And for those who don't know, he's the guy that forced the Air Force to admit that the weather balloon story was bull, complete fabrication. And then they had to scramble and come up with their whole like Project Mogul excuse, right? And they did this
Roswell
whole paper.
Case closed, right?
Case closed. The bodies were just crash test dummies.
Even
and
though they didn't start using crash dummies.
So
until like
dumb. I mean, complete bull. Now, now I'm going to step forward a little bit. So this is something I just recently made a connection to because Schiff, I talked with Doty, and Doty started telling me a lot about Schiff because, of course, Richard Doty was operating in my area. So he was definitely active during all of this period. And then in the 90s, he was around, even though he officially wasn't in, but he was in the circles, right? And so what I found out from him was Steve was already deeply involved in this and had all these connections and stuff. And that's how he had figured out all this stuff. And he had been trying to get at these records, but everything had been, of course, squirreled away, right? Or destroyed or whatever. So he's the one, because he worked on the Congressional Budgetary Committee of some sort. He was like ahead of it. And he knew, well, one thing the government doesn't ever throw away is financial records. So he starts a budgetary audit.
Unless you're unless you're in the Pentagon in 2000.
Right. So he's doing an audit of the Air Force. He's going after them. He was Air Force, so he knows the drill. And so he comes close to outing the program, right? And so then they do this whole Project Mogul.
What
case
year
closed.
was this? Was this like 1993?
93. Yeah, 93.
Yeah, because that's when they created the SAPCO.
Yeah. So it's right in there, right?
Actually William Perry was Secretary of Defense. It forced them.
See, I don't remember what year was the election. It was either 92 or 90. It was in there somewhere, the first one, and then there was the second one later. And so, so he's going. Go ahead.
So I've met William Perry, right? He's at Stanford, but he is, or was, he's still alive, but his mentee is not. He was Ash Carter's mentor. Like Ash Carter also became Secretary of Defense under Obama, and he was my thesis advisor. So I met him in that capacity, but subsequently read about this, that William Perry was the one that set up this SAPCO to keep these SAPs under control because they were starting to get out of control. Anyway, I wanted to add that piece of information.
Oh, that's cool. That's a great piece of information. I love looking into anything associated with Steve Schiff because for me, that was another one of those big moments because, hey, here he is, a guy standing alone. He was the only one. And so then when they released that case closed thing, he starts going on Larry King. He's going on C-SPAN. He's talking about this. He's making a big stink, right? So now I'm going to fast forward. So, 97 is when a lot happened. Okay, we'll get to 97 in my story. But one of the things that, and nobody's ever made this connection out loud, I think we're going to be the first ones to mention it in YouTube. So that's when Greer and Mitchell and all them, they go and they meet with Admiral Wilson and people in the Pentagon. They're trying to get them to look into this, right? So then we fast forward to 2003 or whatever when Eric Davis meets with him and he says, in the Wilson-Davis documents, well, the program was almost outed in the early 90s by an audit. And they had to like reschedule everything and revamp the whole system to hide it better because they were almost outed. That is Steve Schiff. And that's never been talked about. Steve Schiff is the one that almost outed the whole program. And that's who Wilson was talking about because it was so raw. That's when he died mysteriously in 97. He got cancer late 96 and it was like 3 months and he was dead. And everyone in the community was like, they killed him. And it was in 97 when he died. And that's when all of them were looking into this. It was like big deal. And I'm sure that's part of when they told Wilson, you better stand down and you better not look into this. Like, I'm sure he knew, like, oh, yeah, well, this guy who was just looking into it just got. And so, you know what I mean? All those threats. And so when Steve died, for me, that was like, oh, crap. Like, they got him. Like, oh, no, I have to be careful. Again, I'm like, oh, no. Like, I was right there close. And I'm like, ah. So I'm scared again. I'm like, you can't look into this, right? So that was Steve. So I would be able to get a little bit of time with him here and there, and we would talk about Roswell because I knew stuff and he knew stuff. And so he would talk to me. He wouldn't give me any classified stuff, but he was just happy that this young kid, UFO kid, knew shit, like actually knew stuff and could talk with him about it, like on a good level. And I was eager. I'm like, anything you can tell me, like, tell me what witnesses you talked to. Like, but he never told me he was doing all this other like deep background stuff. Like, he never told me that. But I find out later, I'm like, oh my God, it all makes sense, right? So in the night, so then I get married and I'm moving to Taos because I'm going to work up there, get out of Albuquerque and finally like feel like I can tell my wife about my experiences because it was very difficult to feel like I didn't want to scare her off when we were courting and just, like, what? You're UFO? You think UFOs are grabbing you? Like, what? Like, you know what I mean? So I was like very nervous about telling her anything. So finally I like come out to her and she's like, yeah, you believe, yeah, you, like, you're a great storyteller, John, what? And I'm like, why would I make this up? So that you don't trust me? You think I'm crazy? Like, what? And so it becomes this thing, like she just doesn't buy it. And I'm just like, oh, this is killing me. So then we're driving on the way to Taos. We're in between Santa Fe and Espanola, which is called Tohuaque, and it's just right down. I mean, you look over on the map, you see Los Alamos right there. There it is. So we're cruising along, and then we see this sphere, a giant, like it looks pretty big, probably like SUV size, white sphere. Could have been a balloon, I don't know, but it's just traveling straight across the sky, coming from Los Alamos. We're like, whoa! I'm like, what's that? And so I'm driving. I'm like, and I'm telling her, keep an eye on it. Don't take your eyes off it. And she's like, what is it? What is it? I go, I don't know. Keep looking at it. Whatever you do, don't take your eyes off it. So I'm driving. It's intense. And I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the road. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the road. I look at it. It's gone. I'm like, what? Where'd it go? And she's just like, I'm like, what happened? Where'd it go? And she goes, it just took off. And I'm like, took off? She goes, I don't know. Maybe it just disappeared. I'm not sure. And I go, what? And so we're scrambling. I'm like, what do you mean? It just took off. And so she was freaked out, but it wasn't enough for her to be like, I know. And I'm like, I told you. What was that? What was that? She said, well, maybe it was a balloon. Maybe it was blowing across in the wind. Maybe it popped. I don't know. So it's like, okay, it's ambiguous at best. Not proof of really anything. Just something weird. So I'm like, not enough. So now we get to 97, right? And to me, 97 is a pivotal year for ufology because a lot happens. Steve Schiff dies. Phoenix Lights. Admiral Wilson and Greer and all those guys are doing stuff. The Alien Interview, which Jon Stewart's out there pitching right now, comes out. Like all this stuff is. I just
like his interview. My interview of him appeared
97. So all that stuff was happening in that same time period, right? So I'm a snow shovel racer, and I don't want to go into all. You guys can look it up. I have a whole YouTube channel about all of my years shovel racing. All of this is in there. So I'm preparing. We have been invited to the first ever Winter X Games. And my sport, super modified shovel racing, it's a mouthful, has been picked up. And so I am putting a team together of 4 sleds, right? It's a big deal. It's like I'm going to become a professional shovel racer in the X Games. This is awesome. I'm putting together a team. I'm doing all this stuff. Well, MTV reaches out to me and they're like, we have a show called MTV Sports. We're going to send you a camera. ESPN will not let us anywhere at the X Games because in those days they were very, they were not sharing their IP with anybody else. So MTV could not go and film, right? So they're like, look, you're a participant. Just take this camera, do like a behind the scenes documentary and just film whatever you can. And you send us all the tapes and we'll edit it into a part of the show. I'm like, great. It's awesome. So I've got this camera, right? And so I'm, filming the whole process of my build and all that. And, I'm not a like a filmmaker, but I'm just doing basically, like a documentary. I'm filming everything. I'm talking to the camera. I'm telling them everything I'm doing. And so I'm interviewing these guys in Taos. This is 1 week before the X Games. So this is late January. And the funny thing is, when I was talking with Rich, he found jets being scrambled right at this time. So I was like, oh my God, you found 2 jets being scrambled. That's huge. So I'm filming these guys. We're doing this interview and my camera battery dies. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're done. Thanks, guys. We're leaving. So I'm driving home with my wife. We're in Taos, New Mexico. And we're in, basically the plaza area, but we're starting to head towards El Prado, which is where I lived, which was just a little subsection, of Taos, little subdivision. And we're right off the main road. So in Taos, going that direction, you see Taos Mountain, which is, that iconic, beautiful mountain right here. And there's still like some light in the sky to the west. So it's still a little bit light there, but above us, it's dark. You can see the stars. Everything is clear as day. And all of a sudden, this light comes around the mountain. It's not higher than the mountain. It comes around the mountain. Nothing ever flies there. So it's immediately weird. And same thing. What is that? I'm like, keep an eye on that. What is that thing? And so we're thinking helicopter. And the only thing I can think is, well, it's got to be a life flight. Maybe there was a bad wreck over there near Seco or on the way up to the ski valley. Maybe there was a wreck and they're flying people and it's a helicopter. That's the only thing it could be, right? What else could it be? And it's lower than the mountain, which I don't remember exactly from the base of where Taos is, which is around 7,200 feet to the top of Taos Mountain. I don't know exactly, maybe 5,000 feet. So it's lower than that, about halfway. So it's maybe 2,000 feet up. Right? I don't know. Maybe even a little less, but it's coming. It's coming right towards us. And at this point, all I can see is a light. That's all I see. It's bright, though. And I'm like, I know this is weird. So I'm like, oh, my God, we got to get in the driveway. Pull into the driveway. We jump out of the vehicle. I grab the camera. I hit the buttons, and it just has enough juice to go, and that's all it does. Just, and I'm like, damn it. And I throw it down into the car. Right then I look up, and now it's going over our head. Now, no shit, this thing blocks out the sky. I cannot see the stars. And the way I can explain it, if you look it up, and anyone can look this up, if you look online, there's a thing called the Northrop TR6 surveillance platform, something like that. It's like a giant, massive sort of boomerang triangle-shaped craft that I don't know if it exists, but it's the closest thing that I've ever seen to what we saw that night. Now, it goes overhead, and it's got a center light and then 3 lights on each side. So it's like 7 lights. But like when I'm looking up at it, I'm just like, and the lights are doing this. Like there's like a warble, like a gravitational lens effect. Like when you see like the heat waves coming off of a sidewalk, right? And it's just, you can see everything kind of do. That's what I'm looking up. I'm looking up at it, but the lights have almost like a rainbow around them. Like if you put those like kind of like glasses on that give everything like a rainbow tint. So I'm seeing like these rainbow colored lights underneath it that are warping, and I'm just in shock. Like and my wife, same thing. She's just, and it's flying right overhead, silent as can be, quiet, not one sound. And it's not going like UFO speed, I would call it. You know what I mean? It's doing maybe 200 miles an hour, maybe less. It's not going fast, right? And so, but it passes overhead, blocks out the sky. It's, I don't know, 300 to 400 yards. I don't know. I mean, it was huge. I mean, it's 2,000 feet above me, and it's blocked out the entire sky over my head. So I don't know, because I was not watching the edges. I was staring into the light, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I was communicating but I was like dumbfounded, right? I'm stunned. My wife was like literally trying to like trace the outline. So I remembered it as kind of a triangle shape, but she was like, no, it was more boomerang shaped. And I was like, really? And she goes, yeah, I was looking at the outline. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to trust you, because I wasn't looking at the outline. I was just looking straight up going. So it just keeps going. Now it's going right towards Taos Pueblo. So now it's not over us anymore, but you can see it, and it's still cruising. Now all of a sudden I'm doing this like I always do. I'm looking around like, what else? And then I see 2 lights come around the mountain. Now these are Air Force jets again. Second time I've seen this now. 2 Air Force jets, and they come barreling around the mountain. They're a little bit higher than what it was at, but they're hauling ass, and they're closing on it. And they come right over our heads, loud as can be. F-16s again, single exhaust. I don't think there was anything else in our arsenal in those days. that would have been flying around New Mexico that wasn't F-16. So it had to be F-16, but still couldn't really make out the shape of the jet because it's dark, but it's ripping apart, but it's closing on this thing. So it's cruising over the mountain this way. They're coming up behind it, and then they peel off because you can tell they didn't want to overtake it. Like they didn't want to overfly it. So they peeled off. It goes over the mountain this way, and they go over the mountain this way. Now, the crazy thing is, all of these sightings I've talked to you about, if you look on a geographical map, are so close to each other. I call Highway 64 in New Mexico, which runs from east to west, all the way across the Farmington, Aztec, Dulce, everything, Taos, Angel Fire. I call that the real extraterrestrial highway. So many sightings happen, and it's right on that 37th parallel, like almost perfect. So I don't know what the connection is, but that road, stuff happens there. And it's also, Taos is the bottom of the San Luis Valley, which is also a known UFO hotspot. This thing would have been coming from the San Luis Valley down around Taos over the town and then right over the thing. So we see this thing, these jets are coming. It goes like where it goes over the mountain and disappears is the exact location that the light that I saw pop up and zip away years before being chased by jets. So that area, something about it. I don't know, but something. And I find out later from Native Americans, that's a very, very sacred area where they say there's portals. So another huge thing. But so these jets go over, they peel off, and after everything disappears, I just immediately like turn to her like, oh my God, you saw that. You saw it. Tell me what you saw. Tell me everything you just saw. So she's explaining to me. I'm like, I told you it was real. I told you I'm not crazy. Like, I'm like, all I can think is like vindication because she never believed me. And now, unambiguous, 100%, there it was. Air Force jets chasing it. I'm not crazy. Now, I'm not saying it was alien. I don't know what it was. I have no idea what it was. It was huge. But, so, then I go to the X Games, right? A week later. And I have this horrible crash. And I crashed in front of, 30 million live viewers worldwide. I mean, everyone saw it. It was still being talked about 10 years later as one of the worst things in the X Games. And, all of this stuff. So I have this epic crash. It's on my YouTube. You can check it out. And I get really badly injured. I mean, I have massive concussion. I have my eyes popped out. I broke this facial bone. I knocked these teeth out. I had 3 ribs broken, 3 bones in my back, cracked my sternum, bruised my heart. I mean, I was jacked. I was messed up. So after all of that, I get back home. My sister, who has money from the other family that we talked about, gets one of those hospital beds and sends it to me. So I have one of those movable hospital beds at my house. And so I'm at my house now and I'm recovering. And then Phoenix Lights happens. And I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what we just saw. And I'm pointing it out to my wife. She's like, oh my God. And I'm like, holy shit, that thing's been flying around here for weeks. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'm freaking out. I'm thinking, this is it. The aliens are showing up. Like, something's happening. Like, and little did I know, behind the scenes, they're all thinking the same things. Everyone is scrambling to figure out what is going on, right? And so I'm just in an existential crisis. I'm just sitting there for days. All I can think about is this. And I'm just like, because I'm trapped. I'm just sitting there. And I had been taking a lot of pills and muscle relaxers and painkillers and smoking a lot of weed. But I started getting hooked on the pills. This is important. So I quit cold turkey. I'm like, I'm addicted to these things. I got to get off these things. So I quit cold turkey and I go completely sober, right? And all of a sudden my dreams start getting crazy, which is very normal when you stop smoking pot. But so I'm sitting there and I have my best friend, Jeff, my ex-wife there. And we're sitting there in our room and I'm in the living room. That's where this thing is. So I can just stay close to the bathroom. And, my wife can't sleep with me because I got braces and all this stuff on me. And I'm sitting there and all I'm thinking is about this. And I'm basically like crying out to the universe. Like, I don't know what's happening. I need to know what's happening. Like, this is driving me crazy. Like, it's just like, it's torturing me. And all of a sudden, lightning bolt from the blue, I get this. At the time, I didn't know what to call it. An epiphany. I was like, oh my God. Like, it was an answer. All of a sudden, like, I asked for the knowledge. And then I was given this, what we now call a download. And all of a sudden I had this 65 million year time history of all of the species, all of the aliens. And I had never looked into alien species. I wasn't looking into like reptilians or this or that. Like that was not my wheelhouse. I didn't know anything about any of that. Never studied it. But all of a sudden I had like historical figures. I had timelines. I had future. I had apocalypse. Bible stories. Like all of a sudden everything to me makes sense. And I'm just like, and I'm in a panic. And I'm like, and I'm hyperventilating. And they're like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, oh my God. I understand it. I think I got it. Like I've got the answer. I don't understand it. I'm like, I have to tell you guys. And they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I have to get this out of me. I'm like, you guys are just going to have to be patient. Let me tell you this story. All of a sudden this all came to me. And I just felt like if I don't say it out loud to them right now, I'm going to lose it. I was scared. I was like, I have this answer and I don't know what it means, but I have to get it out. Right.
Do you remember any of it now? Or
all of it. I don't know. It's become the obsession of my life. Like I'm telling you, this is all part of the story. So all of a sudden I just start telling the story from beginning to end. And what I call the template, because it's so deep, the knowledge that was given to me, that for me to even explain the basics, it's like 8 books. All right. So I've been trying to write this thing. But so at that point, I'm just like, and I'm like, I have to get it out of me because I was afraid that if I don't say it out loud, I would just forget it. And I was like, I have the answer, so I have to regurgitate it so I will be able to say it. So it takes me like 2.5, maybe 3 hours. And I just like get it out of me and they listen and they're like, what the hell? Like, you know what I mean? How many people have a download like that, but like in front of witnesses? And I'm like, I have to get it out of me. So this becomes this like burning obsession inside of me because now I feel like
you said 65 million years ago, like that's the extinction of the dinosaurs. That's the chicks.
Yes, absolutely. All of it. What happened to the dinosaurs? Where we come from? Who was here? Who the watchers are? Everything. Like, it sounds crazy. I know it. And I don't know if any of it's real. I have no idea. But it's my theory, quote unquote, my theory. And I didn't understand how it came to me. I didn't understand it, right?
Well,
so this was something.
For shits and giggles, why were again, we have no idea if this is real. This is just your experience.
Right. No idea.
Why were the dinosaurs wiped out? Was it to make space for us?
Oh, shit. Well, yeah, kind of. Well, and they weren't really wiped out. In my theory, they were relocated to another planet because they couldn't exist here anymore. They were not. They didn't die after the asteroid, and they were coming back. And it's complicated. I mean, that's a whole nother 6-episode series to me to start talking about my crazy theory because it, like I said, it was so much. I mean, they gave me what I call a temporal causality loop. I only use Star Trek terms because I'm not a physicist. I don't understand time travel. I don't like that. I'm not a scientist. So like to me, what it told me is that we are trapped in a 65 million year time loop. And I call it the future genesis theory. And that in the future, there's a point where we create a space arc that everything, all of the knowledge with a huge AI that's called the Oracle. This is the sentient AI, the Oracle. I didn't know anything about AI. I only knew Terminator. But all of a sudden I had this whole understanding of this, what this all was. And that there was an AI and that it was really in charge. And that it had all of the knowledge of our history, but it was built in the future, but then was transported to the past with this colony ship, right? Like they were trying to leave the planet because our planet was just screwed and they were trying to go somewhere else, but instead they went back in time and they were trapped back in time. So we have super advanced, technologically advanced human beings and AI and some alien races that stowed aboard. That's a whole nother story. But back in time before the asteroid. So that now we have a human colony on the planet during the time of the dinosaurs, during the time of the asteroid hit, surviving that, coming back, and then creating a society of watchers, keepers. I call them the keepers of history, because they now know that they are stuck. They can never go back. and they have to stay and make sure that by being there, it's a paradox. And so they have to now monitor the timeline over all these millions of years to make sure that what happened to them in the future actually happens. You know what I mean? It's like a creation loop, a creation myth. So our Genesis, the Bible Genesis, actually starts in the future, but goes to the past, to the garden. You know what I'm saying? Like everything made sense to me. All religions, all myths, legends, historical figures, everything got plugged into what I call the template. And over the years, as I started doing more research and people started coming out with all this ultra-terrestrial theories and this, I was like, holy shit, that's it. That's this. Oh my God, everyone's getting a piece of it. And so I used to think it was just my own crazy mind coming up with a way for me to understand things so I wouldn't go crazy, right? But then I started going like, is this real? Like, are other people are on this? Like, how is this happening? Like, I didn't realize that I was tapping into some sort of universal truth or consciousness or something. I had no idea what any of that meant.
Let's put a pin in that. And let's get back to the...
But so now I felt like I have an intuitive understanding, right, of so much of the phenomena that I did not have before. So I have these answers. So that's helping inform how I start researching. And that's when I start finding out that, Bill Richardson was into UFOs, and I start trying to get around him a lot and help him with his, because he was at that point was getting into the Clinton administration, but he was still coming back a lot. He was still doing events and this and that. And so I would just try to get in the room with him, remind him of who my family was. My mom helped get you elected. Oh, yes, your mother, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, yeah, and I hear you're into UFOs. What's your deal? And so I would just, I'd get a few minutes with him here and there whenever I could. And so I was trying to foster that relationship too, right? So now we get, let me see, is there anything else? So now we're getting up to the point where, well, in the 90s, another important thing happened. So the third trial of the guy who killed my sister, a third trial. It's a long story, but it's a third trial. And during this trial, because I was a boy, like I had grown up hating this person. I wanted to kill him. Like I had murderous intent, like in my heart. Because I saw what he did, you know what I mean? Like that never left my mind. So I wanted him dead. I wanted to hurt him. So now gets a whole new trial, and it's the whole family's up in arms, right? But the McDonnell family people and her father did not come. They did not want to be in the media circus. Very much. They don't like that attention. But my sister was there, and my mom was there. And so we're all there. And several times throughout the trial, he would turn around and look me in the face because he'd be like, "You're Andrew," which is what she called me. And he'd be like, "She died squealing." And he would sit there and like whisper shit to me about the shit he did to her. Like, and it made me realize that she must have been calling out. He knew who I was, which didn't make sense to me. But then I'm like, she was crying out to me or something when all this was happening to her. And so he knew that was the little brother that she was talking about. And now I'm there giving him the death stare, like I'm ready to kill you, motherfucker. Oh, God, sorry, bad language. And so he keeps turning around and saying stuff to me. And I just click because I was going to fight or flight. This one was fight. So I just leap over the thing and I just start pummeling him. I'm trying to kill him. I would have, if they wouldn't have pulled me off, I would have strangled him right there in the court. And the bailiffs pull me off. It's a big scene. The judge pulls me into chambers and he's like, "What the hell? Like, do I have to have you removed from this court? And what are you doing?" And so I tell him, I'm like, "Judge, he's saying this. He's saying this. He's literally admitting it to me. You should put me on the stand right now. He was admitting it." I'm like freaking out. I'm like, "You don't understand." And so the judge separates the families. Now they're coming in through a back door. All this stuff is happening. So during this time, I'm very close with my sister. And now I'm married and she's married to a guy who now becomes one of my best friends. And so now I'm like starting to go on trips more to St. Louis, visit the family, hang out more, getting in the rooms, like the weddings and all that stuff. So now I'm in the room with all these people I've been waiting my whole life to get in the room with, right? I'm like, oh my God, but I can't just start talking about UFOs. So I'm like, well, what do I do? How do I get these people talking? So I'm like, well, what do people love to talk about the most? Well, they like to talk about themselves. and they feel like they're the masters of the universe because they are this, American family royalty, right? I mean, your family built the Mercury capsule, the Gemini capsule. You were integral to the space program. You built the F-4 Phantom, a legend in the 60s and 70s. And then, the F-18, the F-15 Eagle, the Comanche helicopter. I was obsessed with this stuff. So whenever I was around them, I was always trying to get them to talk about that stuff because their kids and my sister's cousins and whatever, they didn't care about that. The family, if they weren't in the family business, they just wanted to spend the family money. It was a very different culture than what I came from. So I was always wanting to ask questions and tell me about this and what was it like working with the astronauts and tell me about Apollo and tell me about Von Braun and you know what I mean? And so like every once in a while, I would like say something that would trigger someone and they'd start talking and I'm like, ooh, because I was invisible. You know what I mean? Like I was just this kid who they didn't even pay any attention to, but I would get them talking. Like, cause we'd be having all these family gatherings and stuff and all the men, would have, it was very much a different culture than my culture, this very rich world. Right. And so the men would always sort of go off to the smoking room and they would all masters of the universe conversations and the women would go over here and the kids would go running around and I'm supposed to be running around with the kids, but I'm following around the old people because I'm like, I want to get in the room with these things. So I would like bring up things. I would get them talking about it because he was a, mechanical engineer and he was in the Air Force. He couldn't fly because he had bad eyesight. And so he could never be an Air Force pilot. So he ended up going on the mechanical engineering side and was involved in like the nuclear stuff. And so I recently saw all this stuff that McDonnell Douglas was working on nuclear engines and all this kind of stuff and learning from my mom.
By the way, we just found out, both of us found out today.
Yes. And I already knew he was connected to that because my mom used to tell me that
on the nuclear stuff. Right.
Yes, he actually wrote all these manuals on Air Force handling of nuclear weapons and this and that. So he was absolutely in the know, right? And I knew, I'm like, these people know. Like I knew at this point, because now it's like mid to late 90s. I already have all this information and I've been doing my own research. They don't know anything about me or that, right? So I'm just like, because these guys know Air Force jets chase these things that, the astronauts saw this stuff. Like Mitchell was out by then and, Gordon Cooper was out. There's quite a few astronauts, so I was like, I would just get them start talking about stuff. And then I would hear things that didn't make sense to me. And I would hear like Mac, which was James S. McDonnell, the family, the guy who started the whole thing, right? World War II, bomber pilot, bombing the, Nazis, all this, started McDonnell Aircraft, was already designing spacecraft before we even had a space, program. And that's why he was chosen. And so, but I would hear them say stuff when I'd start talking to them about, well, tell me about the early days of the space program. Tell me about like working with the astronauts and, oh, did you meet Kennedy? Or, I'm just like, ooh, like getting them talking and I'm just listening. Right. And I would hear them every once in a while. I'd hear weird things that didn't make sense to me. Like, oh, Mac hated the Nazis. He hated working with the Nazis. And I was always like, yeah, I could see he hated Nazis. He was bombing Nazis. Okay, I get it. I didn't know about Project Paperclip. I didn't know Von Braun and all these people were Nazis, but I would hear things and I'd clock that. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean? He didn't like working with the Nazis. I don't understand that one. And they didn't have, so I was like, so I kept hearing things. So I would get them going. And then every once in a while, which is a tactic I still use today, I'd get them feeling comfortable. They're just spilling stories. And then I would like get them to talk about like, well, doesn't Lockheed have da-da-da-da-da? Or what about this North American or whatever? And then they would start, oh, they hated those guys. So then they would like, and because they didn't want to, they're not going to spill any secrets to me, but they certainly hated those other companies. And they were deeply involved with, spying on each other and stealing each other's people. And, there's, and competitive bidding process, all that stuff. So like they loved to gossip about the other companies. And so I would always use that and be like, well, our stuff's pretty cool, F-15 Eagle, but, Lockheed, they did the SR-71 and the F-16 and, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, and they'd poo-poo that. And then they'd be like, if you knew what we were doing and not, so I would just hear stuff and I'm like, oh, this is freaking great. I'm slowly getting more knowledge, right? So I'm like, ooh, Lockheed, they hate Lockheed. I'm like, I got to look more into Lockheed. I got to look into these other companies. And so I'd start, kind of looking into it, whatever. And then at one point, well, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I would just be in the room. And even at like the wedding, like I remember we had my sister's, because she got married a couple times. So there was a couple different weddings. Everyone's at the weddings, right? And so they rented out a Mississippi river boat, a whole boat, a paddle boat. And it's like either the night before the wedding or 2 nights before the wedding. And like everyone's there and everyone's getting drunk as shit. And they're just partying it up. And I am following. I left my girlfriend with my sister and some other people. And I'm following around the masters of the universe. That's what I used to call them. And I'm following them around. I'm trying to listen in all I can. And so I get them talking a little bit about something. And then I just drop a UFO bomb. And I forget what I said. I said something about like maybe astronauts seeing, aliens on the moon or, something just to see how it would drop, right? And a couple people just scoff, like whatever. And a couple people just immediately look at me suspect, like, what does this kid know? Who is this kid? Like, why is he in the room with us? You know what I mean? Oh, no, that's, Marcella's sister, brother, whatever. And so it would be like, oh, he's nobody, nowhere. But why is he, he's saying some things out of school. And so I would kind of like, that would cool the room really quickly. I'm like, okay, they don't like talking about this. Okay, so that's good. That's information. Click, click. Okay, more knowledge. So I slowly, keep looking into this. And then a situation happens in the family where now they need me. They need me to do a job. And I'm not going to go into the details of the family dynamics, but they need me to do a job. And I'm now in negotiations with them to do this job. And it's going to really affect my life and my family and my wife. Now I have a young child and our kids are hanging out now. We're getting invited a lot more to hang out there. We're going to Christmases, New Year's, Thanksgivings. So now, I'm getting to be much more well known with the family. And Leslie's dad takes me aside one day, because one of the things I loved doing with him was like everyone lived in the family home. Like, so Mac, the original, had his house, right? And then his son moves into that house. And then his daughter ends up moving out of the house. But that house was like the legendary house. And his office was like a museum. It was like a mini Air and Space Smithsonian museum. It was just like all the models of the planes and the pictures of them with all the famous people and, all that stuff. And so I loved going in there. So I'd be like, oh my God, let's go in. Can I go in your office? And can we look at your stuff? And can you tell me some stories? And so one of the first times I was in the office with him talking, he brought up the fact that I earned a lot of respect for him when he heard that I attacked the murderer of his daughter. Like he that meant a lot to him. And he was like, when I found out about that, like that was he like all of a sudden, John, I'm on the radar now, like someone that he likes, right? And so that's why they chose me for this position. I had been ingratiating myself now for quite a long time, and I'm in the family, and I'm no threat, so they bring me in. And so I make a secret deal. I'm like, unbeknownst to my wife or his wife or my sister, anyone else, they're like, look, I'll accept this post, but I need something back from you. And he was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm paying you, I'm doing all this stuff. I'm like, no, because that's all great. But I'm like, it's really going to stunt my growth in my career, having to take on this other responsibility. So this has to be between you and me. And so I tell him, this is the first time I tell him about my experiences, the sightings, but I'm like, I've seen this. I've done the research. I know the Air Force knows. I know about the moon. I know about the astronaut. And I just start speeding off facts, like bang, 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 bang. I know this, I know this, I know this. So I go, I know it's real. I know. And I know you know. So you don't have to give up the goods, but I need to be able, I need someone to talk to about this, someone that can help me, point me in the right direction or whatever. He's very hesitant, but he reluctantly agrees to, okay, but like they're very strict ground rules. I cannot push him, only when he's willing. He's never going to give up any classified, he's never, and so I'm like, okay. And so we create this bond. And so over the next 13 years, I just have communications with him, whether it's in person when I'm out there or on the phone when we're doing, dealing with all the situations that I'm dealing with for him. And I always had little codes. I'd be like, because he was all business. These people are all business. They're very, very savvy, super smart, and he's not going to just start blabbing. You know what I mean? No way. So I have to like work very hard to get any little tidbits out of it. But at this point, I'm like, I've spoken to Schiff. I know about Roswell. You know what I mean? So he knows, like, okay, the kid knows shit. So I can't act like I know nothing because he knows enough to know I know shit. So during these conversations, I start learning a lot of things and talking about the family and the patriarch of the family, James S. McDonnell, the man, Mac, as everyone called him. And I start hearing, you know, I don't remember when I learned about Paperclip, but that's when I remembered them talking about Nazis. And I'm like, so explain to me. I go, did you guys work with Von Braun? Was he, you know, did this and that? I go, because he was obviously right there. And that kind of got his goat. And he was like, you know, Mac did not like working with the Nazis. He hated them. And this is when I start hearing stuff like that, because I was like, well, you know, reverse engineering, what happened to all the craft materials? I had already read Corso's book. So I'm like, what about this book? What about this? They're giving all these aerospace companies this. And he goes, well, you know, he goes, yes, everyone was offered seats at the table, right? But Mac didn't want to work with the Nazis. And they were very involved, the paperclip Nazis, you know what I'm saying? And so they were sort of distributed amongst different companies and different organizations and whatever. A lot of them at the Alabama, Huntsville. So that's where like Von Braun's group was and whatever. And so basically I find out like they got iced out, like that they, you know, I mean, they built both Mercury and Gemini, but they did not want the Nazis in their company. They did not want them taken in. And so they got iced out. And so then you had Grumman and North American building the Apollo systems, and then Von Braun building the Saturn V. And that was all outside of McDonnell Douglas's thing. And I'm like, well, did you guys get anything? Like, and he goes, well, we didn't get the good stuff. And I'm like, good stuff? I'm like, Lockheed? He's like, and so he would, a lot of times he wouldn't say anything. He would just give me looks like, or I'd shock him. You know, he'd give me the shock lip. And so, yeah, he's like, we got scraps. We got the scraps. And it was it hurt the company because they didn't get a competitive advantage. Other companies got competitive advantages. And this is one of the things people talk about now, like, why don't we disclose? And you know, and I think Lou Elizondo brought it up, but he's like, do you understand the lawsuits that could happen when, you know,
it's anti-competitive. The government's
right. Like you can't,
some Commerce Act or something like that, or not.
Yes, the lawsuits. I mean,
what about
you
companies
know, and
that went bankrupt that weren't offered these technologies?
Well, and right? McDonnell Douglas
practices, right,
suffered because of it. Even though they had great contracts and they were building some of the best platforms, they were still slowly like crashing because they weren't on the inside, as you know what I mean. They weren't the preferred groups. They didn't decide to just throw everything aside for this access and these technology and these scientists from Germany. And so they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so that was a big deal. And that was a huge shock to me, but it started making sense. I'm like, oh my God, I get it now. Like, holy crap. Like, cause that family feels like they're American patriots, and they did not want to sell out America to the Nazis, even if they could get some sort of technological advantage by working with them or hiring them or having them be program managers or whatever. So they didn't get them. I mean, I don't know exactly. There could have been one or two, but they did not. Like all those people, whoever they all are, all the names, they're all out there. And I've never read Annie Jacobson's book. I probably should. I bet I would have a lot of revelations reading it. But like for me, it was just like, okay, I get it. You guys were American patriots. You didn't want to sign in on this, right? But still, you're complicit. You still knew. You still benefited. And it used to really irritate me. So, but yeah, so I just, you know, I kept digging into it, never stopped. And yeah, okay, I'll just stop there, and then you can ask me a question. Like that's a lot just came out. So,
did you ever have any discussions about bodies?
He didn't know much about bodies. He would not talk about that. And I never talked about like abductions or my personal experiences. I felt very wary. Like he was super cagey. He would not just start. He's not a talker. I mean, I had to like, and I knew when like we were on a phone conversation, okay, I'd have to have a couple questions ready because we're not going to have a 45-minute talk. I'm going to get a few things in, and then he's going to hang up. Like, I know. And so we would always talk business. And then at the end of the business call, I would always say, so do you got a couple minutes? And that was our code. Like, oh, and he'd check like, okay, I have a few minutes. We could talk. And then I'd have questions. I'm like, and I'd rattle off some things. And sometimes he wouldn't say anything. And other times he would say, that's very interesting. You're on the right track there. Look into this or look into that. So I'd be like, he would just point me and I'm like, ooh. So then I would go down these rabbit holes and I'd dig some more and I'd look into more stuff. And I'm like, okay, so the next time I talk to him, I have another couple questions, see if he'll answer, and he would not answer everything for sure. But I would like get little tidbits like, but no, I could tell like there was a lot of areas that were definitely taboo, off limits. He did not want to talk about it. And there was plenty of times that he just would basically tell me, I can't talk about it, or I don't know anything about that, stuff like that. So I couldn't push very hard. I had to be very delicate in my communications with him. At this time, then you have Bill Richardson, who has now started running for governor of New Mexico. But because I had talked to him, I don't know, it was mid-90s something at some event, and we were talking about Roswell, and I only had a couple minutes, and I could tell he was very interested in the subject. And I'm like, oh, so you're going to look at it? He goes, oh, no, I'm positioning myself to find out stuff. I'm like, oh, that's great. So then he's working for Clinton and whatever. And then I find out he gets put on as the head of the DOE for like a year and a half, 2 years. I don't remember how long he was there, but he's in the DOE, right? So I'm like, if I ever get in the room with Richardson again, I got to talk to him about this, because now he's like, that's where they hide a lot of this stuff. So I was like, oh, the DOE, this is amazing. So I remember like I was working at a radio show, Native America Calling, and my host, Harlan Macasato, was like, yeah, I sure wish I could get an interview with the governor. I'd love to be able to get an interview with the governor. And I just heard him in passing. I'm like, I can get you an interview with the governor. And he's just like, what? I'm like, oh yeah. I go, I can get you an interview. I go, well, let me make a few calls. And so, and I have another one else. So this is when I would use those family. I always use the family names whenever I could, even though no one in the family knew I was doing it, and they would have killed me if they'd have known what I was doing. But I was always using that. Like that was my in. Like, so I made a few calls. I talk to his secretary. I tell him who I am, who my mother is, who the family is. Politicians remember who got them there, right? So, you're going to help your donors. And so I milked that. And so we got into the room in the governor's mansion. I don't know, it was like 2000, not the mansion, but the office, in the roundhouse up in Santa Fe. And my guy did this whole interview with him about native topics and this and that or whatever, and how the government's dealing with the native tribes here and whatever. And so as we're packing up all the gear, I had one of my production assistants. When I pack all this stuff up, I need to ask the governor a couple things. And I walked over and I'm like, so, like, you remember who I am? And first he didn't kind of remember. And I'm like, remember, I'm this person's son and I'm connected to this. And, we got you, and I've met you a few times. But I go, oh, UFO kid. Like everyone always like, UFO kid. I'm like, that's right. And so I go, can I talk to you a couple minutes? And he's like, sure, come on in. So I come into his office and I just start talking about, Roswell and this and that. And he's kind of looking at me and I'm like, so, we're just talking. He's not sharing anything, but I go, but, you just had a stint at the DOE. I'm like, so did you learn anything interesting? Did you see where the bodies are buried? That kind of question. And he just kind of went, it just gave me a look like, oh yes, I learned some shit, and I was like, oh damn, but he wouldn't tell me anything, but I'm like, oh, confirmation, I'm like, and so that was a big one, and then I, met him a couple more times at some like fundraising dinners and stuff like that, just a couple questions. It's not like he'd sit around and talk to me for hours about UFOs, so I'm not going to claim that, but I would get, I would just ask enough that I kept getting confirmation. It's like, oh shit, okay, DOE, he definitely like that. That's where the shit is buried, and and so I'm like, oh, dang, I'm like Q clearance, and I'm like, oh, my wheels are spinning. And so another thing that I did that was how I used the family was I was finishing. I went to college in the 90s, didn't finish my degree, went back after I moved back from Taos to Albuquerque and was getting my broadcast degree. So I was in the communication broadcast. I'm doing news reports. I'm doing all this stuff. And I had seen a story with Harrison Jack Schmidt, who was one of the last, he was Apollo 17, one of the, Gene Cernan and Schmidt went on the moon, right? Last two people on the moon. And he was the only real scientist, a geologist, trained scientist to ever go to the moon. So I had seen an interview with him where he was talking about, we need to go back to the moon, we need to mine helium-3, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, this would be a great, like, segment for me for my thesis when I was, getting my, my final project and stuff. I'm like, if I could get an interview with him and talk about the future of spaceflight and going back to the moon and commercialization, I'm like, this would be amazing. So I made a call to my contacts in the family, and I'm like, do you guys have any way to reach out to this astronaut? He lives in New Mexico. Another astronaut who lived in New Mexico I don't know if he's from Roswell, but he represented Roswell. He was deeply knowledgeable about UFOs. I did not know at the time he was working for Bass and NIDS. So he was investigating the phenomena, but very secretive. He was not out. He was not going to pull a Mitchell. He was not going to come out and say, aliens are real and they're here. He was not doing that, but he was deeply involved. And I did not know this at all, but I just knew he was an astronaut. They had just come out with that From the Earth to the Moon series, maybe a year or two before on HBO. So, and I knew I was a child of Apollo. So I'm like, to meet this astronaut and get to actually interview him, I'm like, this is a dream come true. So I made a call, and they made a couple calls, and literally the next day I get a call from his secretary saying, well, I was asked to give you an interview with Mr. Schmidt, blah, blah, blah. Are you in Albuquerque? And I told him, yes, and you can do it here at my radio station, and we'll set the whole thing up, and whatever time works for him, whatever. So we set up a time, and everyone at the station was flipping out. Like, how did you get Harrison Schmidt interview? Like, everyone is like salivating. They're like, how did you get this interview? I'm like, I know people. And so I get this interview, and I have it. I've never posted it. I think I did digitize it. If not, it's on a VHS around here somewhere. But I'll post it one of these days, because I was so nervous. I was such a young pup. But so I do this 30 to 45-minute interview with him, and he's just giving me everything about, helium-3 and how we would mine it, and the future of spaceflight is definitely commercial. NASA's never going to do it. And so I'm just, and I'm eating this up, and I'm like, tell me about what it was like on the moon, and did they portray you right in the TV series? And, and I'm, we're having a great time. It's great. And he's very straight man. He's very serious. And then at the very end, I'm like, just about to wrap up. I'm like, okay, I'm going to drop the bomb on him. Here we go. And so I'm like, so, what do you think about the stories about astronauts, Apollo and others who, saw, UFOs or aliens on the moon, and the stories of many astronauts interacting with, spaceships up there and this and that, and, and he just freaked out. He's like, what? That's all bullshit. And just like, who's said that? Who's saying that? And I'm like, I name. I'm like, well, Gordon Cooper's come out, and Edgar Mitchell's come out. And it's all, well, Edgar, he's just kind of like, oh, blah, blah. Edgar, he's kind of, whatever. And he just dismisses the whole thing. But he's mad now. And you can see it in the interview. He just gets pissed. I'm like, that's all bullshit. Blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about it. And he ends the interview. And so then, as soon as the cameras goes off, he's like, who have you been talking to? What do you know? Like, I think he thought I knew he was in NEDS. And that he was like, oh, shit, this kid is, trying to catch me in something. And he was pissed. And I didn't know any of that. Nothing of that. I just thought, you were on the moon. Shit. So I was just like, and I knew I had to wait till the very end, get all my normal stuff in and then try to bust it with that. And so all the way, I walk him to his car, and he is livid. And he's reading me the riot act. He's like, this was a gotcha interview, and I can't believe this. This was not approved. And you better not broadcast that portion and whatever. And I don't want to be seen talking about UFOs. And he was just mad. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I did not know. I just, innocent question. I was like, oh crap. He's mad at me. I'm like, oh no. So he takes off, goes home. I get a call the next day from my people who are like, what the hell did you do? He called them immediately. He's like, you had me meet this kid. He starts talking about UFOs. They were pissed. And I'm like, it was just one question. It was innocent. I didn't I was like, crap. And I took a beating on that one, because he was not happy at all that I got him with that. And then years later, when I start hearing about all the stuff he was into during all that period, I was like, oh my God, that's why he was so mad. He thought I knew he was secretly investigating UFOs. That was top secret. You know what I mean? They were on Skinwalker Ranch. That was right in the time all that stuff was happening. And I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't know anything about the ranch or Bass or Bigelow, any of it. But he thought I did, and he thought I was trying to catch him. And that was another one where when I got to meet him, but it was, once again, it felt like confirmation. I'm like, why would you be so mad about this? And then when I figured out later, oh, because he was really into the topic and was secretly researching it, and he thought I was going to get him, and he thought I was, you know what I mean? And so he was pissed. So that was like one of the highlights of my life, getting to interview him, and also like one of the like, oh man, damn, I kind of put my foot in my mouth on that one, but it was worth it. It was worth it. It gave me a lot of, things to think about.
Is there anything when talking to the family that was revealed that shocked you?
Yeah, but I'm hesitant to talk about it. It's the darker aspect of the phenomena, because at the very end of my communications with my family member, I had learned enough to know or believe that there are dark forces working here, and that they are deeply involved and entrenched in the system and controlling things. And I was very upset about it, and I couldn't understand how they could be complicit, the family, and how they could profit from it and be okay with, well, I'm just going to live a billionaire lifestyle and just, screw the rest of the world, and we're all living a lie, and, reality is fake and it's a psyop. And this was something to me that I just couldn't take. I was very upset. And so during our last conversation, I was talking about that. And I was like, I just don't get it. Like, you're so honorable. Like, I can't believe how the family could be involved in this. How could you be complicit in this cover up? Like, I was mad. I was just mad. And I'd never gotten mad, or I was always very careful how I talked to them. And so I was just mad. And he looked me in the eye and just said, it's because we're not in control. And I was just like, we're not in control? Like, we as in humanity is not in control? And he just gave me a look, and I'm just like, damn. And I'm like, so then I'm start thinking, all the other things I know, and Holloman and Eisenhower and possible deal being made and all that stuff, which I was well aware of. And I just was like, did Ike surrender? It's like, that's it, we're done. And he stood up, closed the door, walked me out. We never talked about it again. Within a year, I was shunned from the family, cut off, and done. Never spoken again. I am persona non grata. He didn't tell me anything, but he told me everything at the same time. Because, he's a World War II buff. His dad was a World War II vet. They loved Ike. And so for me, when I said, did Ike surrender? Like, I'd never seen him. Just, it was instant. This is over. Stood up. Come on. We're out of here. You're out of the office. I'm not talking to you ever again. I overstepped the bounds, and he told me all I needed to know. Do I know the details? No. But for me, that was a confirmation for sure about all these stories we hear about Eisenhower and Holloman and the meetings that took place and who was there. And there's so much, data out there that you can look into, and everyone knows what I'm talking about. But that, for me, was my confirmation. And that's why when in spaces, I always tell people, I'm like, look, I'm not here for disclosure. I've had it. Okay, I know. I'm here for you people. I'm fighting for you, the people, to be told the truth. Because to me, the truth and the lie that we've been sold is a crime against humanity and against history. And I don't know all the dark forces. I don't know who's in bed with who. I don't know all the things about all these alien races. I have my own theories, but I don't know. But I know that it's wrong, and that we've been manipulated and lied to and twisted, and that it's out of control. And that's why I support this disclosure movement. I support anyone who seems to be pushing disclosure forward. I fight against debunkers, the people who think it's all bull crap and that none of it exists and it's all just human tech. Of course there's human tech, absolutely. But that is just a tip of the iceberg. And there's a lot going on here. And I know that. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm fighting. That's why I'm telling my story, because I can't take it anymore. Like, I've been bound by secrets my whole life, and taboo and stigma. And I knew, and I informed everyone, like in my family, like, I'm joining the fight. You can disavow, you can stay clear of me. That's fine. I don't want anything to go back on you people, but I can't do it. I'm not part of the cover up. I didn't, I in some ways I did benefit, but
but you
know what I mean?
You don't live your life on the backs of a lie.
No.
Like a luxurious lifestyle. So like, look,
Right.
I'm done too. Like these people are like I mean, I can't specifically speak to your information or to your situation, but the people who are running the government right now are the most incompetent that I've seen in a lifetime, and they don't deserve to be in charge anymore.
No.
And like this thing's getting out, and I think people are in their OODA loop, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're in their OODA loop. And
and it used to be you could plug a leak.
Fuck them.
Yeah. You just plug a leak. There's a leak, you plug it. There's a leak, you plug it. A leak, plug it. Now the boat is leaking from so many places, you can't plug them all. And that's why in spaces you have people like Jason Sands coming out and whistleblowing and talking. That's why you have all these ex-intelligence people coming out, pushing disclosure, even though they all have their own sort of agenda and they're trying to craft it a certain way because
they're trying to craft the narrative so that it's the less disturbing aspects of it.
Right. And you can't
they're trying to steer away from the dark aspects of it.
Right. And I understand when they say catastrophic disclosure. I even call it apocalypse.
Bring it on.
But that's what they're afraid of because when it all comes out,
they should be afraid. They should be like George Bush Sr. has said things like this. If the American people only knew what we've done, they would rip us apart.
Yes. Exactly. And that's what I was
referring to. He didn't say he was referring to. It could have been any number of things, but he did say something to that effect.
Yeah, and he was the last president to really know.
Well, he was the head of the CIA at one point.
Yes, exactly. I mean, other presidents have been minorly briefed, a tiny little layer. This is all we're going to give you because you're basically a temporary employee. But Bush Sr., he knew. Reagan, he knew.
Well, look, we're in the internet. We're at kind of, in the internet world. You can tell that the powers that be are flailing. They're doing absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I'll just give you a small example. It's the debate, right? That happened last night.
I didn't watch it.
Used to have a 7-second delay.
Yeah.
They extended that delay to 1 to 2 minutes, right? They're just constantly trying to, yeah.
So if anything comes out, they cut it immediately.
Right. And who knows what we saw, like what was in it, what wasn't. But it's not about the content. It's about the fact that there's a constant effort to censor everything, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, all it is it's a display, and they don't realize it, but the more they try to exert control, the more when you look behind the mirror that they're scared, they're desperate. It's a sign that they're nervous about losing. I'll give you another example. So like Scott Ritter, right? He's left the country for Russia, given these ridiculous speeches to the Chechens in Russian. Like he just looks like a clown when he does it.
Who is this? I don't know this name.
Scott Ritter. He was a former UN weapons inspector. Now he's very outspoken, like, pro-Russian, like just, he's on, I would advise somebody doing that. It looks crazy, but he's already kind of discredited himself by doing things like that. But you know what the State Department does to him when he tries to fly out again to Russia? They stop him from boarding the flight and they seize his passport, right? Like, it just makes them look desperate and weak, right? Like, how does a strong, somebody who has a firm control over the system, how do they deal with somebody like that? Just let him go. He's harmless, right? And then when he comes back, you just jam him up. You mess with him a little bit, right? You keep him, you keep him in a booth for 36 hours, and then you let him be on his way. But you seize his passport? What are you afraid of? There's a video of him speaking to like a group of Chechens in Russia in Russian. He looks like a Putin propagandist. Like, why are you? But you're seeing signs of this over and over and over and over again. And, word's been put out, and I'm not going to say how I know this, but like word has been out that they've shut this down. They've shut down disclosure. There's been an order that's been sent out. Why? What are you afraid of? Right? So this is a level of peak incompetence I've never seen before in my life. I think you're seeing the devolution of power globally, like individuals, particularly with AI, it's going to empower individuals to have an outsized impact. And they're just constantly trying to plug all the holes with this censorship regime. They're pushing us toward a global war. The whole COVID thing was, you could see reality fraying in front of your very eyes. Like it was insane. So anyway, look, I hope we get catastrophic, because we're not going to get organized disclosure. It's too late for that. It is absolutely too late for that.
Dude, my theory is always going to be that the only disclosure is going to be from them. They are going to disclose. Like, they are on their own timeline, and everyone is scrambling. Why do you think the billionaires are digging in and, creating bunkers and this and that? And everyone's talking about that.
They know something we don't know. They know something we don't know.
And there's so many people coming out with these timelines now, 2027, something's going to happen. There's all these theories, and so many quote unquote insiders coming out and using this thing. Even Leslie Keane saying, yeah, you guys, you're going to have to get used to not having the same world and the same kind of stuff you have now. Like, everything's about to fall apart.
We're already seeing, so like the level of incompetence displayed, particularly in my state, I'm in California. They're mandating that every vehicle is supposed to be EV by 2030, right? They're nuts. Like AI, right? It requires you to use these GPUs, which are highly power intensive. So I'm hearing, just from, shop talk, from consulting work that I do, that we're going to have a power crisis in 18 months. You also have cryptocurrency, which is also draining. At the same time, we're closing dams out here to save the salmon. We're no longer building nuclear power plants. We're not, as far as I know, we're not building any new power plants. I had a discussion with someone who used to, who, I'm not going to say who they work for, because that's not, but they had experience as a submariner where they looked at nuclear reactors. And there is technology coming for, nuclear reactors that, instead of powering a state, they can power, for instance, a city, much smaller, much faster to develop.
Absolutely.
But they're not coming in 18 months.
No.
So we're going to be in this really distressing power crunch. And that's probably part of what Leslie Keane is talking about. I mean, while I was gone, it got really hot one day, and there's a power outage where I live. It's because, the clown running my state, Gavin Newsom,
they can't keep it. Yeah, they can't keep the power on.
But that they're not even thinking about the issue. They're not even planning ahead, and it's obvious. So,
I haven't even talked about the water situation, because that's another situation that could break the entire Southwest. The lack of water.
Oh yeah,
I drove
over the Colorado River coming in.
That's something I know a lot about, and that is another one of those very not talked about in the mainstream. The crisis that the entire Southwest is under, because when the water dries, they're not putting any new water into the system. There's nothing happening, and there's just more taxing on it year after year after year.
It's almost like unforced errors, if that makes sense.
Well, why fix the problem if you don't feel like there's going to be anything around to, you know what I mean? Like, if you have some, knowledge that something's about to give, and why put all your eggs in trying to fix things for a long term that might not exist? And if that's your mentality, that something's coming, whether it's an alien reveal or World War III or apocalypse or whatever, asteroid hit, whatever it is, if you have some sort of foreknowledge of that, then you have no incentive to fix real problems, because your only thing is live it up while I can and try to survive the apocalypse.
Yeah.
And that's,
I tell you what, though, if that happens and there are survivors on the surface, the moment those people come out of their little safe zones, I hope the people on the surface slaughter them.
They're not going to be safe. It's just a bullshit. Like, you know, whatever. Stay under there for 2 years. You still got to come out. You're not, you know what I mean? You can't, like, so yeah, it's all signs point towards something bad. And then once again, that comes back to my download. You know, my download very clearly states that there is an agenda to push this apocalypse because they need that to happen for their timeline. We must go through this. Exactly. Like the only way they will exist, their giant million-year culture, which has spread throughout the galaxy from the past, will exist as if this situation on our planet becomes so bad that they can trick us into believing we have to put everything into this basket to leave the planet, to relocate, when really it's just a restart and to start their whole civilization, which starts in our future but goes to the past. And so we are just in a really bad part of the timeline. We are in the worst part of the timeline because I'm a doomer.
For a reason. Some of us are here for a reason.
And I feel this is what I learn in spaces. People like me, like yourself, like others, feel activated. Now, once again, I do believe in good and evil. I don't believe in gods or demons or, you know what I mean, like a religious tint to it, but there is good and there is bad. And I do believe we have both types of entities here that are fighting over this. There are people who are guardians or watchers, and there are people who are trying to subvert and trying to figure out who's on whose side and what's going on. That's super hard. So, you know, I feel like it's not hopeless, but we have to stand up for ourselves. We can't just roll over and show our belly. And that's what the Ike thing for me was like. I couldn't believe it. I was like, we just rolled over and showed our belly. But I mean, I get it, because if you look at the timelines of what was happening, I mean, when you like, and that's why I love Rich's work, because he, you know, using the ability to access databases and use AI and collate and to make connections and stuff, which that's why I started following him so early. I was like, oh my God, this guy is doing something no one else is doing. I love it. This is a great way of proving. People say, where's the proof? Where's the proof? Look at the evidence. People always say, where's the evidence? I'm like, it's all around you, but no one is going to just serve it up for you. You got to go dig it up. And Rich is like making it easily digestible for people and serving it up. And I'm like, that's the proof. And you know that there was all these overflights, the early 50s, there was so much happening. They were taunting us. They were shooting us down. We were shooting at them. Like shit was going on. And it was a display of power. Right. It was a display,
but nobody remembers it, and nobody, and it's all laid bare in the newspaper articles.
It's all out there. You have to look for it. It's not going to just fall in your lap on CNN. You got to go dig it up, and that's the thing that I tell people in spaces all the time. Like, what's your proof? Where's your evidence? Where's your proof? I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like a PhD. You're like a preschooler. You're still learning your colors and shapes. You don't really know anything. I can't explain it to you because you don't know enough. So go back to school, do your research, and then come back, and then you'll understand the answer, because you can't if you're at that level. You can't understand it. There's no amount of evidence that can just, here's the evidence.
Yeah. And the thing is, there's a lot of noise out there too. So you have to flood yourself with the information, and soon like these patterns will start to emerge. Yeah. But I think we're like way over. So I appreciate you, John, and I think people will be very interested to hear what you had to say.
Just one man's story, just one piece of the puzzle. There's so many pieces, and I'm glad that I have one little piece to add, and I feel it's important. So I appreciate the platform, and for you and Rich both reaching out to me and being able to tell my story and, you know, give my theories, just to, you know, I just want to help any way I can. So, you know, people can find me on Twitter. You can give them my handle or whatever if you can post something, and follow Rich Gildrich. He's the man. Of course, subscribe to your podcast, and you have some great podcasts and great guests. And I'm sure you have some cool stuff coming up too. So I can't wait to see what you've got going. And I'm just happy to have been involved. So I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, There are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you could get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.